Last week, Vladimir Putin said the Kremlin could use weapons of mass destruction to protect the territorial integrity of the Russian Federation if it came under threat. Rather than targeting known Ukrainian military facilities, Russian forces have more recently conducted attacks against core civilian infrastructure in a bid to deflate Kyiv's morale. The UN reported, many civilian objects, including dozens of residential buildings and vital civilian infrastructure, including at least 12 energy facilities, were damaged or destroyed in 8 regions, indicating that these strikes may have violated the principles on the conduct of hostilities under international humanitarian law. Damage to key power stations and lines ahead of the upcoming winter raises further concerns for the protection of civilians and in particular the impact on vulnerable populations. In a speech on Tuesday, President Zelensky confirmed that there had been widespread blackouts in a number of regions across Ukraine following Russian missile attacks. He added, "We will do everything to give people electricity and heat this winter, but we must understand that Russia will do everything to destroy the normality of life." Intelligence reports from the UK Ministry of Defence have suggested Russia remains on the back foot in Ukraine amid a crisis of supply concerning weapons and vehicles within Moscow's armed forces. Defense officials suggested the swathes of newly mobilized Russian troops arriving in Ukraine were poorly equipped and weapons that were available among active battalions were likely barely usable following improper storage. The Kremlin had refuted this information as Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu reported. At an early stage, there were problems with various types of supplies and subsistence for the mobilized. These problems have been resolved. All those deployed to their units are provided with the required supplies, uniforms, equipment, and food at the same standard as professional military personnel serving under contract. Russia sending broken-down trucks to Ukraine-based soldiers, new footage shows. Russian reservists mobilized by Vladimir Putin in September have reportedly been sent into combat with weapons dating as far back as 1959. Russia is sending broken fuel tankers to the front lines in Ukraine as they struggle to restock their dwindling supplies of military equipment. In footage released on social media, dozens of purportedly new vehicles based on the Ural 375, which were built in the 20th century, can be seen being attended to by Russian engineers. A German journalist who shared the footage commented that some of them are broken even before reaching Ukraine. The footage further highlights the struggles that Russian forces are facing on the battlefield after sweeping Ukrainian counterassaults over the past 2 months have left Putin's soldiers short on equipment, while reservists are being sent to the front lines with second-hand, malfunctioning weapons. The photos suggest the vehicles are, in fact, second-hand despite claims they were brand new. He captioned the video, "New Russian fuel tankers, sent to Ukraine, are based on the Ural 375, built between 1960 and 1982. Seems some of them are broken even before reaching Ukraine." Another social media user familiar with the equipment compared it to the Unimog 435, which is a fuel tanker built by Mercedes-Benz in the same period. They suggested the fuel consumption of the Russian vehicle was more than twice the amount of the German model. They said, average consumption is 50 liters per 100 kilometers and increases when driving off-road and when the vehicle is loaded. A Unimog 435 from the same decade consumes between 17.5 and 20 liters per 100 kilometers. Expensive fun even for Russia. As Putin's soldiers in Ukraine are reportedly already struggling with a lack of supplies, Russia's problems appear to have been compounded by poorly equipped reservists as they begin to enter the war zone. Many of the mobilized soldiers have been armed with barely usable weapons, according to British defense analysts, dating back to the 1950s. Open source images suggest that the troops have been issued rifles of a type which could be over 60 years old, such as the AKM assault rifle, which uses ammunition incompatible with the current weapons used by fighting Russian soldiers. The intelligence update, posted by the mod on Twitter, said, in September, Russian officers were concerned that some recently mobilized reservists were arriving in Ukraine without weapons. Open source images suggest that those rifles which have been issued to mobilized reservists are typically AKMs, a weapon first introduced in 1959. Many are likely in barely usable condition following poor storage. The integration of reservists with contract soldiers and combat veterans in Ukraine will mean Russian logisticians will have to push 2 types of small arms ammunition to frontline positions, rather than one. This will likely further complicate Russia's already strained logistics systems. Fears that they will have to enter the war zone poorly equipped have led thousands of Russians to flee the country, a problem that has become so significant that neighboring Poland announced on Wednesday it was erecting fences across its shared border. Polish soldiers began laying razor wire Wednesday along Poland's border with the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad after the government ordered the construction of a barrier to prevent what it fears could become another migration crisis. Scale of Russian losses is jaw-dropping. Putin cannot go on. As winter fast approaches and land operations in the Ukraine war stall in the autumn rains and mud, it is perhaps timely to review where we are after just over 8 months of conflict. We appear to be at a natural pause in proceedings with little change in the front lines, although combat continues with marked ferocity in places. From the Russian point of view, things aren't looking too good. After early reverses in Kyiv and Kharkiv, they're now increasingly under pressure from Ukrainian forces in the Donbas and Kherson. In the east, Ukraine looks like it will continue making ground and recapturing settlements lost only a few months ago to the Russians. In the south, around Kherson city itself, Putin looks in danger of having his forces cut off and isolated. The scale of Russian losses to date is jaw-dropping. Although it is always difficult to obtain independently verified figures, there seems to be a general consensus across all observers that they have lost, since the start of the conflict on February 24, more than 2,500 tanks, in excess of 5,000 other armored fighting vehicles, approximately 270 aircraft and 243 helicopters, and somewhere in the region of 70,000 personnel killed, wounded and missing. This is an enormous casualty bill by anyone's reckoning, and probably unsustainable for very much longer at the current rate. No doubt the casualties suffered by Ukraine are equally appalling in proportion, but figures here are much harder to come by and closely guarded, for obvious reasons. No point in encouraging the enemy. The very real question now, though, is whether Russia is losing momentum through running out of weapons and personnel. There are signs, for example, that their stock of long-range, precision-guided missiles and rockets is running low. Much of this may be attributable to Western sanctions, as much of the technology required for such weapons was previously sourced from outside Russia.